So it gives me great pleasure to welcome all the way over from France, Howard Crowhurst.
I'm going to be talking about a sort of discovery I made a few years ago, which I've called the Megalithic Solstice line of southern England. And it's a part of the book that I wrote called the Megalithic Plan. So it's what I'm going to be talking about is in that book in part, but not everything I'm going to be saying today is in the book. Okay, I'll just go back to this photo. That was taken at winter solstice in 2014 when I'd come over to check up on some of the stuff I've been working on. I'm on the top of the Cheddar Gorge there. And I walked up there with my wife and some friends to watch the sunset over the Mendips at winter solstice, and we discovered this stone, which is not, it's not recognized as an official standing stone, but there it was. So this whole thing started some years ago when I was reading a book by John Wood, a book called Curvature, which is the name he gives to Stonehenge. John Wood was an architect from the 18th century, and he was asking the question, where was the town of Camalodunum, the seat of ancient Druid knowledge in Great Britain? John Wood was what I call a neo-Druid. And so he was trying to find out more about the history of the Druids in England. And he says in this book, there are various conjectures as to the location of this hill, but Pliny informs us that the town of Camalodunum was about 200 miles south of the island of Mona. Mona being Anglesey, in North Wales. And so I thought that was rather strange because Camalodunum is normally supposed to be Colchester, which is not at all 200 miles south of Anglesey. So I thought I'd check up on what Pliny had written. And so I went to the Natural History, his book Natural History, and in a chapter called Where the Days Are the Longest and Where the Shortest, which is rather a strange title because it's the same place. Where they're the longest, they're also the shortest. He should have said when the days are the longest and when the shortest. But anyway, that's a different thing. So that's a chapter of his book, Pliny's book. And he talks about the Arctic Circle, where it is daylight continuously for 6 months at one point of the year. Okay, he says this can be seen on the island of Thule, thought to be Iceland, which he says is 6 days sailing north of Britain. So we can see here on the map that you can see how the Iceland just touches the Arctic Circle, so what Pliny is saying seems to be quite true. But then, in his text, Pliny adds, some say the same of Mona, which is an island about 200 miles away from Camalodunum, a city in Britain. Now, what on earth has that got to do with anything? Why is he suddenly talking about Anglesey, which is much further south, and Camalodunum? It's totally out of context. Now, I know that the Roman authors underwent censorship. You know, they weren't allowed to write about any stuff. It was the Roman Empire, wasn't it? You know, so they had to, if they wanted to get certain information across, they had to be very subtle about it. And I thought that maybe this is what Pliny was doing here. So I looked into, there is a footnote in his book. You can see here at the bottom, this is the bottom of the map. I've encircled the island of Anglesey, Mona, And we've gone 200 miles due south here, okay? And so there's a footnote in John Bostock's book about the natural history by Pliny. And he says, Camalodunum is supposed to be Colchester and Essex, while the Mona of Pliny appears to have been Anglesey. It is not easy to conceive why the author measured the distance of Mona from Camalodunum. So he sort of says what's going on, but then that's it. And nobody seems to have sort of thought about this since. So let's just look into what was happening before the Romans turned up in southern Brittany in France. Julius Caesar turned up in 56 BC, and this is where he attacked the Veneti here, which was the name of the people who were peacefully living in Karnak area at the time. He attacked there in 56 BC, and it was rather violent. He executed the entire Veneti Senate, and so a lot of people moved out, and the Druids especially moved out, and they moved north towards Wales and to Ireland. They moved towards North Wales, called Gwynedd, which is still the name of the area in Van, which is just near Karnak. So it's still called Gwynedd in the area. So there's the same name for those two areas, okay? And the people who lived there in the first century were called the Venedoti, which is very close to the Veneti. Okay, so there's an obvious link between the peoples. So here you can see the island of Mona. And in 60 AD, Paulinus Suetinos attacked Mona with 20,000 soldiers. This was a very dangerous thing to do, because while he gathered all his soldiers together and marched them across to Anglesey, and during that time, that's when Boadicea made the most of all these soldiers going off to Anglesey and re-attacked, and lots of Romans were killed, and places like, different towns were taken, you know. There'd be a lot to say about this attack on Anglesey, but that's not my subject. He resolved to subdue the island of Mona, a place inhabited by a warlike people and a common refuge for all discontented Britons. All right? These were warlike people because they fought against the fact that their country was occupied. He calls them warlike. Anyway, they marched over there to try and subdue them, and they finally won, but I won't go into all those details. After the fall of the Roman Empire, between the 3rd and the 7th century, a lot of people moved back and founded what is Brittany today, Armorica, with its 5 departments, organized in the same way as Ireland, basically. And let's get down to the details now then. So that's a zoom in on Mona. And right to the west of Mona is Holy Island, where there's Holyhead, which is where you get the boat to go over to Ireland. And we'll zoom in on Holy Island, okay, and Holyhead. And at the top here is a mountain. It's the highest point of the whole of Anglesey. It's called Caer i'r Tŵr. Tŵr. I don't know if my Welsh pronunciation. Haven't spoken Welsh since I was 9 months old. So that's the high point, and we're going to be looking at this. It's a very important point in what I'm going to be talking about. Here's a quick photo of it. An Iron Age hill fort has been found there. Hill forts. right? Whatever they are. So, and that's the view over the harbour at Holyhead. Okay, so if we go due south 200 miles from that particular point, let's see what happens. I've done a little video, which I hope is going to work. Yes, it is. So this is Google Earth, which I've pre-recorded. So we're going to zoom in here to the island, Holy Island, and then further into the spot I just talked about, Kaya Tours. Tours could mean tower. Okay, so it could be the stronghold of the tower. Okay, and we're going to zoom in and see the view from there. Okay, so we're on Google Earth, so you can go around 360 degrees and see that's the harbour, and then that's the sea over towards Ireland. And then if we keep turning, you can see towards the south and, okay, towards Wales. You can start seeing southern Wales there, and the whole of the island of Anglesey. You can see how flat it is. It was a very good farming land, and Anglesey provided food for most of Wales. It's very, very strong, very important part of North Wales. Okay, so a perfect view there from that point. So now we're going to put a point on here, on this cairn, and we're going to go 200 miles due south. Now, we're going to go 204 miles due south. Okay, not exactly 200 miles, 204 miles. Maybe there's some difference here between the English mile and the Pliny mile. All right, so this is 204 miles. Look at the angle there, 179.91 degrees. So this is 9/100ths of a degree from perfect north-south axis. Okay, and we come to a place called Castle Dore. Okay, now if we look at that line, we can see that it goes straight through the island of Lundy. Look at that. That's Lundy Island, a north-south island just outside the Bristol Channel. And Lundy Island is exactly, the centre of Lundy Island is exactly on the latitude of Stonehenge. John Michel went there. I think John Neal perhaps went there. I know Robin Heath and Richard Heath went there with them to check up on what was going on. It's exactly the same latitude as Stonehenge, which is quite an important point, this island all of a sudden in the middle of the sea at the latitude of Stonehenge. And so if we go due south from there, then we come to this, Castle Dore. Okay? Now, what we're going to see now, I think it's now. Is it now? Let's see. Yes. We're going to see that from this particular spot, if we go up to the highest spot in the whole of southern England, which is called High Willhays. There are two high points here. One is called Tor, and the other High Willhays. They're north-south. That's Tor, where we're zooming in, and that's High Willhays to the south. They're not far one from the other, and these are the two highest points in the whole of southern England. Okay? 621 feet. Meters. Must be meters, mustn't it? Yeah, 621 meters. So that's a relationship which we're going to see is important. I'll show you in a second why. Now, this place is called Castle Dore, also goes under the name of King Mark's Castle. and it is said that it was the court of King Mark of Cornwall. He was based here, and there is some evidence around to corroborate that. His other name is Cunnamour, King Mark. He's said to have reigned in Cornwall in the early 6th century. And there's a stone, the Tristan stone, 2.7 meters, which marks the grave of his son. Well, it used to mark the grave of his son until it was moved to put a bus shelter a few years ago. Yeah, this isn't a joke. This is actual fact. So now it's a bus shelter that marks the grave of his son, Tristan. Yeah, we can understand why he's sad, right? So Tristan was the guy who had a terrible dramatic love story, Tristan and Iseult, and there's a plate on the base of the stone which says, Tristan lies here of Cunnamourus the son, okay? And it says Cunnamourus was Marcus Cunnamourus of the medieval life of St. Sampson and King Mark of Cornwall in the love story of Tristan and Iseult. So I'll come back to this King Mark business because the fact that this place is called King Mark's Court is very important. This is an embroidery of King Mark dating to 1350, but if he died in 600 and something, then, well, probably doesn't look much like him. Now, if we look at the arrangement of Castle Dore, it's a sort of henge monument, ditches, like Stonehenge, like the old Stonehenge, with ditches around it. And there's an opening. You can see an opening in the inner part here. The diameter of that is 79 meters, a little under 80 meters. And around that circular monument, there is an oval sort of monument, okay, which is another big bank, which surrounds it and has an opening which is offset. The two openings are offset, okay? So this opening in the outer one is not exactly aligned with the opening in the inner one. These are trees which sort of give us a kind of false impression. This is there was an archaeological dig there, or there's been several, I think, at Castle Dore. It's on a hilltop, and so you can see the banks. So this is the opening of the outer circle, or the outer shape, and this is the opening of the inner shape. So this looks like an eye, with the inner eyeball and the oval shape outside, okay? The digs then showed material dating to 400 BC, which is obviously a long time before the official date for King Mark. Now, I've put here 2 Stonehenge because this opening, if you draw a line from the centre of Castle Dore through that opening, you come to Stonehenge. And seeing as that point is due south of Lundy Island, and Lundy Island is on the same latitude as Stonehenge, that kind of creates 3 corners of a triangle. And Robin Heath has talked about that, and I won't be going into that particular geometry. He's already talked about that. We're going to look at something else today, which I think is interesting, which is the angle of the outer, the oval shape with its opening, because this orientation is orientated at sunrise at summer solstice, and that goes to high Willhays. So if you're at Castle Dore at summer solstice, then you will see the sun rising over the highest point in the whole of southern England. Okay? It's, in fact, I'll be showing you the angles on this. I've done it in the book, showed it in the book. But between Yestor and High Willhays, there are 2 peaks. They're north-south, and so from Castle Dore, there's a little dip between them, and that will be the angle of the summer solstice sunrise in the dip between these two highest peaks, okay? So it's about 59 kilometers away. The height difference, Castle Dore is 117 meters above sea level, and the High Willowhay 621 meters above sea level. Here's a picture of High Willowhays on Dartmoor. Pretty tricky place to get to. I've never been there. I watched the thing in the other direction. I was in the Mendips, watching the sunset at winter solstice in the other direction. This is a pretty difficult place to get to, especially for sunrise at summer solstice, because you have to walk there in the dark, unless you sleep there overnight, of course. This is the level between the two. I've put the Egyptian hieroglyph for horizon here at the bottom, which shows the sun sitting between two sort of high points. Most of you must know that horizon comes from Horus zone, which is the place of Horus, or the sun, right? So this is the sign of Horus, and it's the sun rising between two hills. It's an important point to talk about. So there's visibility on that level. Now, it's because it's 60 kilometers away, one could wonder if there is visibility, because of the Earth's curve. Let's pretend that the Earth is curved, okay? So there's a formula which talks about how you calculate the visibility between 2 points according to their height. I won't go into all the details, I'll show it to you, but for those two height differences, if there are no obstacles, you can see 1 point from the other at 96.43 kilometers. So here there is visibility. So from Castle Dore, you can see on a clear day High Willowhays, okay? That's an important point. The solstice angle on flat ground in 400 BC was 50, at this latitude at Castle Dore, was 50.82 degrees. Now, because the archaeological digs give 400, I've taken 400 BC as a date. You must realize that the summer solstice angle doesn't change all that much. It changes slightly. It doesn't change all that much. This is not the precession of equinoxes. There's no relationship between the precession of equinoxes, where the stars move a lot, and the solstice angles. The solstice angles move because of the change in obliquity, and obliquity changes by 2 degrees over 20,000 years, okay? There's a lot of confusion about this. A lot of people say, well, if you can see it today, you couldn't see it then, or if you could see it then, you can... No, it's very slightly different, okay? But for exactitude, for exact angles, let's just give the exact angles. So 400 BC, 50.82 degrees, and the sun's observable angle between the summits, 51.93 degrees. Okay, so there's a 1 degree difference between the flatland sunrise and what we see here because of the height difference, So this is a Google Earth video flying over at winter solstice, and you can see, okay, you come to the hilltop, and the point between the two High Willowhays slightly higher on the right. Okay. So here we have the sort of sun's first flash, the first ray, because I'm taking into account the height difference here, 51.42 degrees, and the sun is sitting on the horizon at 51.93 degrees. Okay, so that's the angle we're going to be taking, 51.93 degrees is the angle we're going to be taking for the line that we're going to draw. Okay? Along this line, between Castle Dore and the highest point in the whole of southern England, we go through a spot called Lidford Gorge. Don't know if you know it. Oh, well, we go through Little Link's Tor. Thought I'd show it. I think it's quite pretty. Kind of rocky thing that's just coming out the earth here. But we go through Lidford Gorge. I don't know if you know it. You can see all the photographs here, you know. And our line, actually, Lidford Gorge actually kind of snakes around the line, okay? So not only is Lidford Gorge on the line, it's going along the line. And I'll show you some more photos of Lidford Gorge in a minute. That's the line followed by Lidford Gorge, and the purple line is the line that goes for the sunrise from Castle Dore up to High Willhays. Here's some photos of Lidford Gorge. It's the deepest gorge in southwest England. So going along this line, we have the deepest gorge in southwest England, and it's going up to the highest point in the whole of southern England. Okay? So there are two kind of opposing phenomena here, geographical phenomena, which are quite interesting, geological phenomena. Now I'm going to extend this line in a straight line. So we're going to go from Castle Dore in a straight line. I'll come back to this in a bit later, because a straight line drawn on the earth is not a straight line if it was on flat paper. Okay? The angle slightly changes. I'll come back to this. But I have a reason to do this, to draw it as a straight line. Okay? So we draw this straight line from Castle Dore through High Willhays, and we'll see that it's going to go to a certain number of places, which may or may not seem important, but we're going to go into them. Have I gone a bit too far there? Yes. So I've got a video here again from Google Earth, so we're going to zoom into the different spots. First of all, Castle Dore here. This is just so that you can see that this line is not moved. It's just a perfectly thin line, which we're not moving. So show you here that this is the center. The point we're going from is the exact center of the circle. Okay? So I've traced the circle out there so that you can see that. And then from here, we're going to go right up to Lidford Gorge here. Okay? And we're going to zoom in so you can see how it goes around. There's lots of different sort of course, it's a very touristy place. And so there are a lot of photographs. And so we're going to zoom in, go down into the gorge. So if, for those of you who don't know about it, we can get a sort of look at it, okay? So you can see the deepest gorge. There are a lot of waterfalls there, okay? The deepest gorge in southern England. So we'll come out of there and go along, have a look, go along the river a bit, and go and see another spot. This armchair tourism. Let's go up here a bit. There, let's go in there. So here you can see these massive boulders that are on either side, massive stones on either side. Okay. Obviously a very powerful place. Important place. All right. So from Lidford Gorge, where are we going to go next? We're going to move up the line to the next point. Let's see. Right. This is High Willhays, of course. High Willhays, yes, Dore. So again, we're going to go into yes, Dore and get an idea of the view from up there. This is important because you can see that you can see for miles and miles and miles. All right, and you can see all around. So if you're organizing the landscape, it's a very important point. And we're looking south here. The point you can see in front of us is High Willhays. There's only a meter or two difference between them, you know. So that's the impression that you get from up there. The heart of Dartmoor. So I've called that the Dartmoor Gap, the sort of dip between Yes, Dore and High Willhays. I've called it the Dartmoor Gap. So we're going to go up the line now to the Mendips. Okay, so that's a little closer to here. There's a place on the right called Cothelstone Hill and Lydiard Hill and Will's Neck. Another Will here. We had High Willhays, and here's Will's Neck. I'll come back to that in a second. And here we are at Will's Neck. You can see again the view from the top of the Mendip Hills. So we can look back from here at winter solstice. If you go up to Will's Neck at winter solstice, then at sunset you can see the sun setting into High Willhays. Right? Because the sunset, you probably know this, but the sunset at winter solstice is on the same line as the sunrise at summer solstice in the other direction. Okay, so if you don't want to get up too early in the morning, you do it this way. Right? And there's another gap here. Our line, in fact, goes between Cothelstone Hill. There are barrows on the top. Lydiard Hill, there are a lot of barrows up there, of course. It was a very important point. So we'll go up the line, and where does the line go now? Through the Cheddar Gorge. So this is another very important geological feature, geographical feature in southern England. Here we are, look. You must know the Cheddar Gorge, home to the Cheddar Man. Yeah, you may have seen pictures of the Cheddar Man, sort of reconstituted image of a skeleton that was found. And we can see again that the Cheddar Gorge is more or less in the direction of the line. Now we're moving up to Stanton Drew. Now this is a megalithic site, and here is an incredible fact, is that this line goes exactly through the center of the great circle at Stanton Drew. Here at the bottom here you have the cove. I don't know if you know Stanton Drew. Behind the church there are these megaliths. One of them is recumbent, that one, and there are two standing stones there. These are the two standing stones at Stanton Drew. And you see the line? Can you see that line? It's going through the stone on the floor. Okay, so then it goes off through the church, straight through the diagonal of the church, okay, and then goes through the center of the circle of Stanton Drew, the Great Circle, what's called the Great Circle, which is one of the biggest stone circles in Great Britain, but it also goes through the center of Circle 2 to the north. Okay? I'll come back to this a little later. Just to show you that the line is, I've put my point in the center, okay? So we'll draw a circle and we'll position the circle, so it goes through the different stones. So you can see that the center of the circle is exactly on this line. All right, and then it goes through the center of this circle too, which is the smaller circle at Stanton Drew here. Okay, look at that. This is a line which we've drawn from Castle Dore. You know, we're 100 miles away. And we've drawn it through between High Willhays and Tor on a solstice angle. Do you think this could be a coincidence? Now, I'm going to draw, if it's not, what is it? What were the ancients up to? That's the question that people have on their T-shirts here. Now, I've drawn a line here in yellow from the cove going up through the center of the circle at Stanton Drew and towards the center of the circle too. Okay, I'm going to draw that again. I talk about this in my book because, in fact, the cove itself is not exactly aligned to the center of those two circles. It's a fact which is given out in certain contexts. People say that the cove is linked to the two centers. It's not, in fact, the case. And there's nothing easier than lining up three things, okay? You have two things, and then you line up a third thing. It's very, very easy. So I'll come back to that. Now, I missed out on that, did I? There was an angle I gave there. In fact, the angle of the line at this particular point is 53.13 degrees, which is the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. So as the line goes through Stanton Drew, it traces the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. Okay? Now we just went down to Tog Hill. I'll be coming back there. That's another high point along the line. And then we come up to Malmesbury. So I don't know if you know about Malmesbury. Malmesbury became very famous a few years ago because of two pigs which escaped the Malmesbury 2. Okay? And but Malmesbury is much more important than that. They managed to stay hidden for a week by swimming down the river and covering their traces. It's a very interesting story. Pigs are very intelligent, you know. But we're going to try and see another side of Malmesbury, which is the Abbey, Malmesbury Abbey. And here you can see the angle. You see, I'm drawing the lines with the angle at the top. You can see 51.93 degrees. That's the angle we're drawing. And it's 225 kilometers, or in miles, 140 miles from Castle Dore in a straight line up to Malmesbury Abbey. Okay? Do you know about Malmesbury Abbey? People been there? Yeah? It's not very well known. So here's the whole of the line. Okay? There we are. Is that it? Seems to have finished. Okay. No, it hasn't quite finished. No, we're going to zoom in again to Stanton Drew here, just to show how that line that I've just drawn, it wasn't exactly the same angle, but just to show how that line, which was 51.93 degrees, you know, there's no cheating going on here. And we don't have to widen out the line for it to fit on different sites. This is just one perfectly thin, straight line, okay? So, all right? So that's an important point. Now this picture shows the high points. At the bottom of the slide here, you have the profile of the landscape. So you can see the point at High Willhays, how it's the highest point all the way along the line there. Okay. And then the next point, 280 degrees, that's the thing, the gap in the Mendips, what I call the Cothelstone Gap, which goes between Lydiard Hill and the Cothelstone Hills. And then the next high point is Tog Hill. Okay. Oh no, where are we here? That's the Cheddar Gorge, the top of the Cheddar Gorge, sorry. The top of the Cheddar Gorge, 250 metres. And then the next one here is Tog Hill, 216 metres. And then we finally come to Malmesbury, and Malmesbury is only 88 metres. So it's the lowest sort of point I'm going to be talking about on this line, 88 metres. And I've done a little calculation there. Can you see? Plus 130 equals 218 metres. Why am I adding 130 metres to the altitude of Malmesbury? Well, let's go in there to Malmesbury and see why. This is an AI-generated picture I made. Well, AI made. It took me quite a while to get the computer to do what I wanted, but it actually did this drawing. Okay, this is a representation of what Malmesbury Abbey would have looked like when it was intact. It had the tallest spire ever built in England. Yeah. Okay. 130 metres. The tallest spire ever built in England. Okay. And it fell after a terrible storm around 1500. It fell and it smashed up. It fell in the direction we're looking from here and smashed up all this end of the church. And they never rebuilt it. They just walled up. They walled up at the transepts, where the transepts cut. They just walled it up. So when you go to Malmesbury Abbey now, you've got half of it. All right? And instead of having beautiful stained glass windows in the end, you've got a wall. All right? There used to be a Neolithic hill fort at this particular spot. All right? So, why did we build the highest spire ever built in the British Isles in Malmesbury? You know, what's so special about Malmesbury? When you go to Malmesbury Abbey, you've got this signpost, you've got this thing in front of it showing the impression of Malmesbury Abbey in the 14th century. Okay. In the 11th century, it housed the second largest library in Europe and was considered one of Europe's leading seats of learning. Malmesbury is England's oldest town. Did you know that? Yep or nope. There you go. One or the other. A lot of people don't know that. And they don't know either that the first king of England, Aethelstan, crowned in 924, was crowned in Malmesbury. He was born in Malmesbury, and he was crowned in Malmesbury, and Malmesbury was the seat of the English court of the first king of England from 924. So if you go inside, you can see his tomb here, with the chairs piled up just behind it, you know. I was really astounded at the sort of lack of interest that there was in this abbey. They were serving beer in there. When I went in there, there was a stone, and they were serving beer. There was going to be a rock festival or something in there. It was really quite, mind-blowing. So I did feel it has fallen. Not only has the spire fallen, but the whole sort of energetic level seems to have fallen quite dramatically. That's the roof. Look at that. Okay. It's absolutely beautiful architecture. This is the doorway, the side doorway, with a Romanesque arch. Just beautiful stuff. So the earliest known name for Malmesbury was Caia Bladen, stronghold of Bladen, the pre-Roman city of the Britons. Bladen, which is the ancient name of the river Avon, reminds us of the ancient Briton king called Bladud, which brings us back to John Wood, the architect, the neo-Druid, who talked a lot about Bladud. Okay? That's another sculpture just above the doorway. It's just incredible, incredible stuff. And just next door, the old bell, the oldest in England. All right. So there's the line. We're going to go to the next point, coming down that line, go to Tog Hill. So this is a photograph I took with a zoom. You can see May Hill in the distance there. That's 80 kilometers away. All right, so you get a very good view from Tog Hill. And you can see the Cheddar Hills. And of course, you would have been able to see Malmesbury Spire from there. This is a memorial. There are faint remains of ancient fortifications that run parallel to the hill there. And there's a little plate there. The Battle of Durham took place near this site in 577 AD. Two Saxons, Cuthwin and Cedwin, fought the Bretons and killed 3 kings, Conmail, Condidon, and Farinmail. As a result, they took the cities of Bath, Cirencester, and Gloucester. So there was a very important battle went on here between the Saxons and the Britons. It says Bretons, sorry, that's a Britain. From the edge of the hill, so the 130-metre high bell tower at Malmesbury would have been clearly visible before it collapsed. So we're going to miss out Stanton Drew for the time being and come down to Cheddar. I'll be coming back to Stanton Drew, come back to the Cheddar gorges. Okay, so that's a view towards sunset. This isn't winter solstice. This must be sometime either in November or beginning of February. The sun would be rising further south at winter solstice. Okay, I've pushed a line showing where Will's Neck is. Okay. That's the line, that's where it goes. Cheddar Gorge has been named Britain's second greatest natural wonder. I don't know what the first greatest natural wonder is, but there you go. So from up there, I went up there to the top there to that line to see the sunset at winter solstice. And from up there, you can see here Nyland Hill, which is, you can see Glastonbury Tor from Nyland Hill quite well. And then in the distance, you have Will's Neck towards the right, and then this gap, which is on the line, okay? So here we are at winter solstice watching this sunset in the Cothelstone Gap, and we discovered this stone there. There it is, unknown standing stone. I put the reference if anybody wants to go and check up on it. You can do a screenshot, a screen thing. So we'll move down the line now to the Cothelstone Hill. Okay, so Cothelstone Hill, Lydiard Hill, and Will's Neck. Seems to be quite a lot going on there. You probably know more about these places. So according to Wikipedia, the name Will's Neck derived from the Saxon word for stranger. It refers to a local tribe, the Wellias, who, according to legend, fought the Romans on the site. So the etymology of Will's Neck isn't very solid, to say the least. Okay, now I'm wondering if there couldn't be some kind of link between Will and the sun, Hill in Breton, or Helenus, because the fact that these two spots, High Willhays and Will's Neck, are linked together by the sun on the solstice, would probably indicate that Will could in some way be linked to that fact. Okay, so Will's Neck, your neck of the woods. Will's Neck could be the pass of the sun. That's another photograph of Will's Neck and the Cothelstone Gap, taken from the back. Okay. Now, if I continue the line down in the other direction from Castle Dore, we come to Helston. Helston. Okay. Helston. Okay. In Helston, you have Côte, C-O-T, which means a bank in French, coast, and Hellstone. Remember this one? The hailstone, which marks the sun. At summer solstice, at Stonehenge. So the line doesn't actually go straight down into the centre of the town of Helston. It goes between Helston and Helford, which is the river pass. You see, the river goes down between them. And this is the town symbol, what would you call it, the coat of arms of Helston. So look at that. So this must be St. Michael, one would imagine, because he has wings and he's got rays coming out of his head. Okay, so he's a very solar figure. And look at that, he's holding a line. There's a very straight line going from his hand down the dragon's mouth, the green dragon's mouth. We've had a couple of dragons dancing around outside this afternoon, and this is all about earth energy. This is all about what's going on in the bowels of the earth and how this needs to be tamed. I go into this a lot in my book because I talk about the Mabinogian story of Ruth or Lud and Clevelis, in which there's this big story about the two dragons, the dragon from the continent and the dragon from Britain, that fight each other on the 1st of May. I can't go into it now. I've already talked about it here maybe some years ago. But this is obviously a very important question, the dragon question, and of course the Sun and the Serpent by Paul Broadhurst and Hamish Miller went into that many years ago. So here we have Helston. This looks, and on either side of the dragon, look, you have the two towers, like Tour, which means the stronghold of the tower, or the Dore. The word Dore is very similar, Dore, all right, which could quite clearly be pointing to the extreme positions of the sun. But there you go. There's a spot between Helston and Helford called Morgan, and on the village lawn there's this stone which they call the Morgan Cross, but there's absolutely no cross on it. So I've called it the Morgan Stone. And if you stand at this stone, then you will see the sun coming. It's the exact angle of the summer solstice sunrise to high Wilhays. You can see it's slightly off the line because we've come further south, we're further down. So from Castle Dore, the line goes to high Wilhays exactly. But if you come further south, it's slightly off. I'll come back to that in a second. Okay. And if we go right down to the coast, we come to Gunwallow. Heard of that? Yeah, it's heard of that more. But perhaps it's not known how important Gunwallow was. It was the first entry in the Doomsday Book. It was then of great importance. I've put the French word there, Guenelay, because you get a lot of places called Guenelay, and there's a Saint Guenelay in England who is clearly, it's the same saint, Gunwallow and Guenelay. It's the same saint. There were all these interactions between Cornwall and Brittany. It's the same thing. This is Gunwallow Church. If you look behind the church, can you see those people at the top? Looks like a woman and a child up here. So you can see the church is just at the base of a big slope. That's another subject which would be interesting to look into. And then right at the point of Gunwallow, if you go to the headland at the bottom, the southern point, you have Llandywednac. All right, Llandywednac and Gunwallow. We'll just take a little move over to France here. Llandywednac, and St. Guanelaise Abbey. Okay, so this is St. Guanelaise Abbey at a place called Llandywednac, and the commune, the whole town, is called Penmach, which means horse's head. Look at the picture. Can you see a horse's head? Look at that. It's his ear. Here is his ear, look. That's his ear. This is his head. That's his neck. All right? And the place is called Horse's Head. All right? Penmach. Why am I talking about this? Because I now want to talk about mach and the horse. Mach is the Breton word, still today, for horse. And a lot of words come from that, like marchand, merchant, a marchand, because the word people used to sell horses, right? A lot. I'm showing here the solar chariot of Trondholm, which was found in a peat bog in Denmark. It's dated to 1400 BC. It's made from bronze with gold plating. So it's a similar kind of technique to the Nebra sky disk. I can't go into the details, but what is actually on that gold plating is very intricate and very interesting, and a lot of numbers come out of that. What I want to talk about here is the solar chariot, the idea for the ancients that the sun couldn't move. And it needed a chariot to be moved. All right? You get that in a chariot or a boat in Egypt. Put the sun in the boat, and the boat would travel, and then it would go from the lowest point up to the highest point, then it'd change boats, and then it would go back down again. And this is a very important point. There's a difference made between the sun and its movement. Its movement is the horse, and the sun is the sun. It's kind of immobile in a chariot. All right? This was quite obvious, and the association of the horse with the sun has been known since the Bronze Age. They represented the sun on a chariot to signify its movement. That's a coin from the Veneti tribe that were there before Julius Caesar turned up, showing a bird sitting on a horse. I think that's really powerful coin. The horse was seen as a brilliant animal. The Indo-European linguistic root for brilliance, mach, would have given the English word for mare and mach in Breton. Okay? So that's interesting. The idea is that the horse is brilliant. So even the brilliance of the sun doesn't come from the sun, it comes from the horse. You can find this in Norse mythology as well, where the sun had a brother, and the brother was killed, and the brother was the brilliance of the sun, and the sun lost all its brilliance and energy, and everybody got sad. But again, it's a long story, can't go into it, but it's important to realize that there's a big link between horses and the sun, and there was a big link between horses and the sun. I didn't say this, but at Llandywednac Abbey in Brittany, there's the monks. It's an abbey. It's been an abbey there since the 6th or 7th century, and the monks there painted Saint Mark. They did drawings of the Bible, and Saint Mark is drawn with a horse's head. Okay? So that's interesting. The oldest attestation of the solar horse is found in the Hindu text Rig Veda, which states that the gods fashioned the horse from the substance of the sun. So let's come back to our solstice line here. And if we push it up in the other direction, we come to a town called March. All right? Which means horse in Breton. March, horse. And we've gone from Castle Dore, which was the home to King Mark. All right? I find it interesting that in March, I don't know if you've heard of the March. Have you heard of that? Students from Cambridge University go to March, the town of March, in the month of March, and they march from March to Cambridge, singing a song which they call the March. And that seems really quite interesting, that people have, from some sort of strange psychological thing, have deemed necessary to go to that point and say March, as if they're kind of repeating some kind of important information. Yeah, but as they're university students from Cambridge, probably doesn't mean anything. Yeah.
When your line crosses the Greenwich Meridian.
Yeah, most probably. I'm just going to keep going. So I'd like to go into March, into the town of March here, because there's something here at March. It's not just a name. There's a church. There's the unique church of Saint Wendrida. This church originates from 650. The church you're looking at doesn't date from 650, but there are remains dating back to 650 on this particular spot. Have you heard of Saint Wendrida? No. She was a very, very important person, and has been recently. Apparently, there's been talk about her. In 1998, there was talk about her in what's that place called? The Vatican. Yeah. They said something about her. It's on Saint Wendrida's Wikipedia website if you want to check up on it. But what's interesting is that according to Joseph Strutt, the body of Saint Wendrida, a virgin, was brought by Essinus, abbot of Ely, to Ely, where it was laid in a rich shrine, most superbly ornamented with gold and precious stones. So her relics were actually coated in gold. The remains were kept in a golden shrine in Ely Cathedral until 1016, when Edmund Ironside bought them and carried them into battle in the hope they would bring him victory against the Danes. Can you imagine the power that they give to Saint Wendrida? But King Canute, the guy that didn't like high tides, he captured the relics at Battle of Assandan and later gave them to Canterbury Cathedral. So they're in Canterbury Cathedral now. Oh, no, they're not. They were. But in 1343, the remains were returned to March. But their final resting place is now said to be unknown. So there's a treasure hunt. St. Wendrida's relics covered in gold are somewhere unknown in March. All right? If this line is continued, March used to be an island, apparently. It's a high point surrounded by marshes, and apparently, a bit like Glastonbury, it used to be an island. Now, if you continue the line right up to the present-day coastline, you come to a place called Salthouse, where I've read there are some Neolithic earthworks, but I was unable to locate them. So there's some research if anybody's interested. So that's the whole of that line. I've put a drawing on here, a picture on here. I was a bit hesitant to get into this, but I'll just do it very quickly. It's a question of time. I don't have much time. That's why I'm obliged to keep speeding on. But you can see there's a point here on the triangle. So it goes through High Willhays here, right? It's an east-west line. This point here is Maiden Castle, which is the biggest hill fort in Europe, Maiden Castle, all right? On the top, there's a big flat spot which is surrounded by all the banks, but the big flat top at the spot has an area of 50 football pitches, right? Which is quite some space. That is perfectly due east of High Willhays. And if from High Willhays you go due west, you come to the island of Tintagel. Okay? So you go right due west from High Willhays to the island of Tintagel. So you can see how on the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west here, all sorts of things are linked up. And if you draw a line from Maiden Castle back up to the top here, where we started at Curvature, at the top of Holyhead Mountain, that angle from north, I'd suggest everybody do this once you get home. At Maiden Castle, there's a little sort of square which is said to be the Neolithic shrine of some kind. If you put a point on that line and go up to the Curvature point at the top, you will get an angle of 333.43 degrees, which is the exact angle of a double square. It's precise to 1/100th of a degree. So there's incredible geometry going on here, and where those two lines cross, where this long line here crosses the line up from here, the town here at the junction here is called Mark. It's in the Guinness Book of Records because it has the longest high street in Britain. It's an east-west high street called the Causeway. And the church there is called the Church of the Holy Cross. Right? Which is, quite a lot of coincidences. There you go, Mark. The town of Mark. And those are where the Solstice line and the line back up cross. Okay? That's the Church of the Holy Cross. Now, just a few details here about the idea of drawing straight lines on spheres. It's very important to do this. A lot of people just kind of reject my work as soon as I start talking, as if I don't understand what the Earth is, or if I was a flat earther or something. And there's something much more interesting going on here. The only straight lines you can really draw on the Earth are meridian lines. If you draw a line towards the North Pole and you keep walking along it, then you'll be going in a straight line towards the North Pole, right? And you won't change direction. You'll be going due geographical north. But if your line is slightly off from due north, then it will slowly bend around. So that if your angle is off a bit further, like on this point, you will see that this line, although I start off at a certain angle, by the time I get to here, I'm going east-west. I'm perpendicular to the meridian line. So the line is curving round like that. Okay? That's an important point. So you have to realize that any straight line you draw on Google Earth, for example, is slowly curving away from the initial angle. So if I take the angle of the line from Castle Dore to High Willhays, I've got 51.93 degrees. If I take it between High Willhays and the Cothelstone Gap, 52.43 degrees. 53.11 degrees between the Cothelstone Hill and Cheddar, which is, as I was saying, the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. So the middle part of the line is actually on the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle. And then when we get to Stanton Drew, it's 53.42 and then 53.55, etc. So the line is slowly, these are angles from north. So the bigger the angle, the bigger the distance from north, so the more it's turning away like that. Okay, the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle, 53.13 degrees. Now, conversely to that, the further north you go, the greater the solstice angle becomes, okay? Which, when you get to the Arctic Circle, then the sun won't set, okay? You can have the midnight sun. So the solstice angle gets bigger and bigger the further north you go. So if we have 51.93 degrees between Castle Dore and the Dartmoor Gap, as I've called it, then between High Willhays, the next part, from High Willhays, your solstice line is going to be 50.5 degrees. Okay? So that angle, that solstice angle, doesn't go along the line, it goes to Will's Neck. Okay, this is the Google Earth line from High Willhays to Will's Neck. 50, the exact relationship between the two highest points, right? That must have seemed an incredible event to observe. The two highest points are linked together on the longest day of the year. Who did that? You know, who's behind this? Yeah. And then the line gets further, 49.8 degrees, so the solstice angle is moving towards the north. All right? So, to finish the talk now, we're going to come into Stanton Drew, come back to Stanton Drew, which I avoided a little earlier. Stanton Drew has been dated to about, well, the dating of Stanton Drew seems a bit sort of, strange, but it's been dated to around 2800 BC. So I'm going to take that date. I think it could be older, but even if it's 3500 BC, that will only very, very slightly change the solstice angle, but whatever. So we have an angle for the solstice on a flat plane in the year 2800 BC. The first beam on flat ground from north will be 49.29 degrees. Okay, so that's at Stanton Drew. Here we have a photo. You can see the stones of the Great Circle. Here you can see them, they're rather small. You can see them there, look. Circles 1 and 2, and we're looking towards the north, so you can see that there are hills here. So solstice sunrise on flat ground is not what you should be looking for at Stanton Drew, because it's not flat ground for summer solstice. All right? So I've got the profile of the land underneath, and I've positioned the Great Circle. So the summer solstice sunrise will be delayed by the hills. It will rise a little later and a little further south than it would do if we were on flat land. And I quite clearly believe that the builders used that. I think they chose that spot, probably for many other reasons as well, but because also that this was going to give them something very special as far as the solar geometry was concerned. So here's the profile of the land. That's the Great Circle, the point in the gap. So we have the profile towards winter solstice and the altitude difference, the angle, and summer solstice sunrise. There's the calculations with the slope, 1.75 degrees. So when you're working out what the angle of the sunrise, the visible sunrise would be, you have to take that into account. I've put all the calculations here, but I'll go right through them. If you watch this afterwards on the Megalithomania website, then you can stop it and sort of get excited about all these calculations if you want to. But it's just to show how it's done, And the conclusion is that the total sunrise offset, because of the hills, is 2.535 degrees. So we have to add that to the flat land angle, which is 49.296, and that gives us 51.831 degrees, very, very close to 51.84 degrees, which is the atan 14 over 11. It's the angle of a triangle, which would have 11 on one side and 11 on north-south and 14 east-west. All right? These numbers are very important. Adam was talking about them earlier. Okay, so let's come back to the cove and the angle from the cove. This is the cove. You can see it here. You can see the two stones. Here they are. We saw them earlier. Between the two stones is an east-west line. Okay, so you can draw that between those. And if you draw that east-west line and you go up to the center of the great circle and the center of the circle 2, so which is shown here, the line that links up the two centers of the circles, you miss the cove. All right, that's the angle of a 3-4-5 triangle, 36.87 degrees. So the east-west line goes through the cove, but the junction point isn't there. All right, the junction point of that is further away. This line coming down here is the line that links up the centers of the two circle centers. And as I say, I think they could have lined up those things exactly had they wanted to. So what happens if we bring a line down to the cove itself? All right? It goes through the circle from the cove up to the center of the great circle. It misses circle 2 center, but its angle, okay, so it misses the center of circle 2, but its angle, look at that, from the great circle center down to the cove, 231.83 degrees. So that, if you take 180 degrees from that, that gives us 51.83. This is the angle of the summer solstice sunrise. So if you're standing from the cove, you will see the summer solstice sun rising over the hills, okay, at the center of the great circle. But the sinus of 31.17 is 0.618. Basically, we obtain what's called the golden triangle. So the geometry going on here from the cove to the center of the great circle is not the 3-4-5 triangle. It's the golden triangle. Okay, so it's the relationship with phi, 38.17 degrees. So you have if you have one north-south, then you have 1.618 on the angle. And this is fairly well known. That's the geometry. This is fairly well known, right? The Great Pyramid. It's the angle of the Great Pyramid, 51.84 degrees. So the angle between the cove and the center of Stanton Drew is the same as the angle of the Great Pyramid, an 11 by 14 triangle. Okay? There's a difference of 0.016 degrees. Thought I'd just remind you about this. This is in my book. I think I've already talked about this here, but I thought I'd remind you that if you go from Lundy Island to Avebury, you have the same distance as Lundy Island to Stonehenge. Did you know that? The angle is 8.13 degrees. It's a 7-fold square, and that line goes through Stanton Drew. So the line from Lundy Island to Avebury goes through Stanton Drew, and it also goes through the circus in Bath, which was built by John Wood, the architect I was talking about at the beginning of this talk. He built a thing called the Circle, and this line goes straight through it. All right? That's a 7-fold square angle, which links Avebury to Stonehenge. And the angle between Avebury and Stonehenge, if you take the angle between the centre of Avebury and Stonehenge from north, it's 4.065 degrees to the west of north, which is half the angle of 8.13, showing the relationship, all right? The geometrical relationship. So, I've come now to the end of my talk. That's more or less the different links that we've seen. I'd just like to point out one final relationship. Okay. This is the largest standing stone in Europe. It's called Crowhurst. It's in Brittany, in the Finistère in Brittany. It's a beautiful stone, very slim, beautifully carved. It's got some strange kind of notches and carvings in it. It's present 10 meters tall. It used to be 12 meters, but the top was chopped off by a lightning bolt at some point. The bit that's fallen off is on the ground beside it, but it still remains the largest standing stone, the highest standing stone in Europe. Look where it is. It is perfectly due south of the centre of Castle Dore. So if you go from the centre of Castle Dore down to the biggest standing stone in Europe, you have a north-south line which can then go up to Mona. All right? And from Crowhurst, if you go down to Agra, the distance is 2,500th of the Earth's circumference on a 3-4-5 triangle angle. But that's another story. So thank you very much. I'd just like to say that I'll be starting between Summer Solstice 2024 and Summer Solstice 2025. It's the major moon. It's going to be a year where you can learn about the major moon, and you can see how the ancients were following it. It's a very important point, very important time. It only happens every 18.6 years, so it's an important time to get out and go and see these things. So I've decided to sort of, do things. So I'm going to be organizing visits to different places, be at the right place in the right time. You've got Callanish, Karnak, Stonehenge. We'll be going also to Alistena in Sweden, which is an incredible place to see the major moon angles right on the cliff tops. And so if you want to know more about that, then you can go on my website, howardcrowhurst.com. And also the film, we showed some of it earlier. It's its world premiere this evening on YouTube channel, free of charge. It's taken me many years to do, and there's been different versions of it. This is the first version available in English. It lasts about an hour and a half, and it's on YouTube this evening on my YouTube channel. Okay, so thank you for listening.